Hello and welcome to the second part of the story, The Mirror in His Hand. Chapter 2. Trapped in Fractured Reality. Elias barely left his apartment. The city outside continued as usual. Students rushing to class, the hum of traffic, the occasional distant siren. But his world had narrowed to 4 walls, a mirror and the man within it. Johannes was always watching. "You're slipping, Elias," the voice whispered, calm and steady. "They suspect you, Dr. Lind, the police, even your students. They see it in your eyes." Elias sat at his desk, head in his hands, fighting the growing panic. He hadn't slept, he hadn't eaten. Time had lost its shape, stretching and twisting into something unreal. He knew the symptoms of sleep deprivation, of psychosis, but knowledge did not do anything to stop it. The lines between reality and delusion had begun to blur in ways he had never thought possible. Still, one thing was undeniable. The mirror was changing. At first, the distortions had been small, a half-second delay, a flicker of movement that didn't belong to him. But now, Johannes mimicked him flawlessly. Yet his eyes were different, sharper, colder. A knowing smile played on his lips. "You should stop pretending," Johannes continued, stepping closer in the reflection. "You know what you did." Elias shook his head violently. "No, I didn't. I would never." But then he saw it. Beneath his fingernails, dark residue. His shirt, small, almost imperceptible splatters of something rust-colored. A metallic scent clung to his skin, his breath hitched. The dreams, the flashes of motion, the weight of blade in his hand. "Do you see me now?" Johannes whispered. Elias staggered back, knocking over his chair. He grabbed at his own skin, desperate to peel away the truth. "I didn't do anything," he gasped. Johannes only laughed. Memories, no hallucinations, no memories swam in Elias' mind. The weight of body pressed against him, warm liquid dripping between his fingers, a sharp gasp, a gurgling sound, and then silence. No, it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Elias turned to the mirror, his pulse hammering against his skull. Johannes was gone, and his place was himself. Only now he understood. Someone knocked at the door. Firm, insistent. "Police?" He stumbled backward, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. His apartment suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in, the doorknob rattled. "They know." They know. His own voice. But from the mirror. Finding light in the darkness. Chapter 2. Elias sat in Dr. Lind's office, his hands curled into fists on his lap. He had barely made it here, every step feeling like wading through thick fog. the weight of the last few weeks pressed against his chest, suffocating. He had almost turned around at the entrance, almost convinced himself that it wasn't necessary, that he could handle this alone. But he couldn't, not anymore. "You did the right thing coming here," Dr. Lind said gently, her voice steady, grounding. Elias exhaled shakingly. "I don't know what's real anymore." Dr. Lind nodded. "That is why we're going to figure this out together." She flipped open a notebook, her posture relaxed but attentive. "Tell me about Johannes." He swallowed hard. "He's in the mirror, in my head. I know he's not real, but it feels like he is. And lately, he's been trying to convince me I've done things, terrible things." Dr. Lind leaned forward slightly. "Have you?" "No," Elias said quickly. "At least I don't think so. But there are gaps in my memory, and I found," he hesitated, "things that make me question myself." She nodded again, unfazed. "Schizophrenia often creates compelling false memories. The brain tries to fill in missing pieces with what feels logical at the same time. But feelings aren't facts, Elias. Have you experienced anything like this before?" Elias hesitated, looking down at his hands. "Not like this," he admitted. I used to dismiss schizophrenia cases as just misfiring neurons, chemical imbalances, but now it feels so real." "It does feel real," Dr. Lind agreed, "and that's why it's terrifying. But you're not your illness. Your mind is playing tricks on you, but that doesn't make you dangerous or broken. It means you need help, and you're taking the first step toward that." He felt something shift inside him, a crack in the suffocating dread. Dr. Lind reached into her drawer and pulled out a folder. "I'd like to start you on an adjustment treatment plan. We'll discuss medication options, therapy approaches, and grounding techniques to help separate reality from hallucination. You are not alone in this, Elias. We can find a way forward." His throat tightened. He had expected judgment, fear, maybe even rejection. But all he saw in her expression was quiet certainty, hope. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't lost. Maybe there was a way back. Welcome to Chapter 3. Trapped in a fractured reality. The knocking grew louder, more urgent. Elias stumbled back, his breath jagged. The walls of his apartment felt like they were closing in, the air thick with something unseen. He could hear his own pulse, erratic and deafening in his ears. "Elias, this is the police! Open the door!" He clutched at his temples, squeezing his eyes shut. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. It was another trick of his mind, a hallucination, just like Johannes, just like... His gaze snapped to the mirror. Johannes was there again, smiling. "You should run." Elias shook his head. No, I didn't do anything." His voice cracked. Johannes tilted his head, his expression almost amused. "Then why are they here?" Elias swallowed hard. His hands were shaking. He looked down at them again, at the dark residue beneath his fingernails. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But what if... Another knock. "Elias, if you don't open this door, we will break it down." His mind splintered. Panic surged. The walls blurred. The mirror rippled like water. His reflection shifted, twisted. Johannes' face emerged with his own. You have no choice, the voice whispered. Elias turned, his eyes darting to the kitchen, to the window. The street below was too far. He'd never survived the fall. But the alternative? The lock clicked. The door swung open. Flashlights. Voices.
Police.
Shouting.
Stay still. Get down on the floor.
Elias pressed himself against the mirror as two officers entered, their hands on their holsters. Dr. Noreen? One of them asked cautiously. Are you okay? He couldn't answer. His throat was too tight. His head felt like it was splitting apart. His gaze flickered to the mirror one last time. Johannes wasn't there. Because Johannes had never been separate from him at all. Elias let out a hollow laugh. His fingers twitched at his sides. His lips parted. And then everything went dark. Chapter 3. Finding light in the darkness. Elias sat in the hospital waiting area, his hands wrapped around a paper cup of tea he had no intention of drinking. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, the low murmur of voices filling the space around him. It had been a long night. Dr. Lind sat across from him, her expression calm, patient. I know it feels overwhelming right now, she said gently. But I want you to understand that you are safe. You are in control. The fact that you came here tonight proves that. Elias exhaled slowly. The weight in his chest hadn't disappeared, but it was lighter somehow. It still doesn't feel real, he admitted. I keep expecting him to show up again. Johannes? He nodded. The mirror doesn't feel like my own reflection anymore. It's like there's another version of me, one that knows something I don't. Dr. Lind tapped her pen against the notebook thoughtfully. That's a common experience for people with schizophrenia. Your mind is externalizing your fears, giving them a face and a name. But that doesn't really mean it's real. Elias let the words settle. He wanted to believe them. She continued. We are going to try a new medication routine, but I also want to work on reality checking techniques with you. I need you to trust me, Elias. When you hear or see Johannes, you must remind yourself that he's a symptom, not a truth. He swallowed hard. And if I can't, then we'll keep working until you can. She smiled gently. You don't have to fight this alone. He looked down at the cup in his hands. It was warm, real. Maybe for the first time in weeks, so was he. Welcome to Chapter 4, Fractured Memories. Elias was 6 years old the first time he saw something that wasn't there. It was late. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. He had woken up thirsty, slipping out of bed and padding toward the kitchen. That's when he saw the man standing in the hallway, a shadowy figure, tall and still. His face was obscured by darkness, but Elias could feel his gaze, unwavering, fixed on him. Elias' breath hitched. He wanted to call for his mother, but the sound was stuck in his throat. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if curious. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. Elias stood frozen for what felt like an eternity before he finally bolted to his parents' room. His small hands shaking as he climbed into bed beside his mother. She stirred half awake. "What is it, älskling?" "There was someone in the house," he whispered. Her arms wrapped around him, warm and safe. "It was just a dream, Elias." But it hadn't been. The next morning, he told his father, expecting a different reaction. His father was a man of logic, of reason. He worked with numbers and calculations, the kind of man who always knew how things worked. Instead of reassurance, his father gave him a long, searching look. Then in a low voice he asked, "Did he speak to you?" Elias hesitated. "No." His father nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. If it happens again, don't answer him." Elias never saw the shadowy figure again, not in the hallway at least, but sometimes in the corner of his vision he thought he saw someone watching. Years later, when he first met Johannes in the mirror, he couldn't help but wonder, had he really been seeing things since childhood? Or had something been waiting for him all along? Chapter 4: Roots of Strength. Elias was 7 when he first realized his mind worked differently from others. It was a bright summer afternoon, the kind where the air smelled of fresh cut grass and the laughter of children carried through the streets. He was sitting on the front steps of their house, watching his older sister Anna braid a daisy chain. "You're quiet today," she said without looking up. Elias shrugged. "I was thinking." Anna smirked. "You're always thinking." He smiled faintly. It was true. He spent a lot of time inside his own head, watching, analyzing. Even at that age, he felt like he saw things others missed. The subtle flicker of emotion in his mother's tired eyes. The way his father's fingers tapped against the table when he was deep in thought. His father was a quiet man, methodical in everything he did, a mathematician who believed that the world was a puzzle to be solved. His mother, on the other hand, was warmth itself, always humming a tune, always finding a way to make others feel safe. And then there was Anna. She was 3 years older, but she felt like a force of nature, always moving, always pulling him out of his own head. "Come on, dreamer," she said, standing up and holding out the finished daisy chain. "You need some color." She placed it on his head with a satisfied grin. "You look ridiculous," she declared. Elias laughed. You made it." Yeah, but it was meant for me," she said, ruffling his head and hair. "You're so serious all the time. You need to have more fun." That was Anna, his first friend, his protector. She never let him retreat too far into himself. Years later, when things began to unravel, when Johannes appeared in the mirror, when Elias started to question reality, he often thought back to that day, to Anna's voice, teasing but kind. "You're too serious all the time. You need to have more fun." Maybe she had seen something in him, even back then. Maybe she had known, in the way that older sisters always seem to know. And maybe, even now, she was right. Chapter 5: Love in the Shadows. Elias had never been good at love. It wasn't that he didn't feel things deeply. If anything, he felt too much. Every glance, every pause in a conversation, every shift in body language, he noticed it all. And maybe that was the problem. He dissected moments instead of living them, trying to decipher hidden meanings that sometimes weren't even there. But with Myra, everything was different. She was warmth in human form, sharp-witted, fearless, and so effortlessly alive that it was impossible not to be drawn to her. She had transferred into his psychology class in their second year of university, and from the moment she challenged one of the professor's theories in front of the entire lecture hall, Elias had been captivated. They became friends at first, study partners, long walks through Gothenburg streets, discussing everything from existential philosophy to their favorite childhood books. She made him feel normal, in a way he hadn't realized he needed. And then, one night, it changed. It was late, the city lights reflecting off the canal as they sat on the bench, the world quiet around them. She turned to him, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You always seem to be like you're carrying something heavy," she said softly. "Like there's a whole world in your head that no one else gets to see." Elias swallowed. "Maybe there is." Mira tilted her head, studying him. "Can I see it?" The question shook him more than it should have. He wanted to let her in. He wanted to believe that he could. So he kissed her. For a while things were good. He let himself believe that love could ground him, that Myra could be an anchor in the storm of his mind. But then Johannes arrived. At first it was just whispers, a flicker in the mirror when she stayed over. "She doesn't really love you. She's studying you, watching you like an experiment." Elias ignored it, but the thoughts burrowed into his skull, growing like rot. He began second-guessing every touch, every laugh, every whispered confession. One night they were lying in bed, Mira's fingers lazily tracing patterns on his arm. "What are you thinking about?" she murmured. He hesitated. "Do you ever feel like I'm different?" She frowned slightly, propping herself up on one elbow. "Different? How?" Elias wanted to tell her everything about the voices, the mirror, the doubt gnawing at his sanity. But before he could, Johanna spoke. "She's afraid of you." And just like that, the moment shattered. Elias pulled away. Mira blinked in confusion. "Elias?" He couldn't find the words. The walls in his mind were closing in, suffocating. He needed to get out, so he did. He left, he ran. And Mira, his Mira, was left behind, a question frozen on her lips. They never spoke again. And years later, as he stared into the mirror, watching Johannes smirk back at him, he wondered, had it been his illness that pushed her away, or had Johannes been right all along? Chapter 5. A Love That Held On. The first time Elias met Mira, she was laughing. Not a quiet, polite laugh. The kind of laugh that turned heads, that made people either want to join in or shrink away. It was their second year of university, during a psychology seminar. Their professor had just made a sweeping generalization about human motivation. And Myra, bold, fearless Myra, had interrupted him mid-sentence. "That's nonsense," she said, grinning. "Humans aren't nearly that predictable." Elias had expected the professor to shut her down. Instead, he had smiled, intrigued. "And what do you believe motivates people then?" Mira had leaned back in her chair, eyes gleaming. "Stories. We all want to believe that we're hero of our own story." Elias had spent the rest of the lecture staring at her, fascinated. They became friends fast. She challenged him in ways no one else did, never let him retreat too far into his mind, always pulling him back with teasing words or unexpected questions. And then, one night, under the glow of streetlights, she kissed him. Being with Mira was easy in ways Elias hadn't expected. She made him laugh, made him feel safe. When he started withdrawing, lost in his own head, she noticed. She always noticed. One evening they were curled up on his couch, her head resting on his shoulder. She was tracing absent-minded circles on the back of his hand when she spoke. "You disappear sometimes," she murmured. Elias stiffened. "What do you mean?" She lifted her head, meeting his gaze. "You get lost in yourself. It's like you're somewhere else entirely." His throat tightened. "And does that scare you?" Myra studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. "No," she said simply, "but I wish you'd let me find you when it happens." Something cracked inside of him. No one had ever said that to him before. No one had ever wanted to meet him in the places where his mind wandered, rather than just pulling him out of them. So he told her, not everything, not yet, but enough. About the intrusive thoughts, the feeling of being disconnected from reality sometimes. About the way his mind worked in patterns he couldn't always control. Myra listened, and when he was done, she squeezed his hand. "You're not broken, Elias." And for the first time in his life, he almost believed in it.